All right, welcome back, everybody. Sorry for the restart. So, welcome to everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. Thought it would be a good idea to make a video about this topic. I've wanted to for a while. I got a few little videos out there, like maybe some short ones or whatever. Not in my theology lineup per se, but like in my video section. Sometimes it might be in playlists. Right. So I do have a few videos that are on this type of subject matter. But I wanted to make a video like I am now, that better covers and encompasses things. So, anyways, that's the purpose of this video. But we live in a skeptical world. Atheism is still a minority, but it's rising. And like I was saying before the restart, but I'll make it shorter now. Um, Even religious people, even Jewish people, even Christian people at times, individuals, people, but probably a lot of people, or even just the average person, will have times of, either doubt, or they'll wonder or ponder if something is wrong or if they're wrong, or they might, wonder or doubt, wonder if God isn't real, or wonder or doubt if God is real. There's different extremes. Could be anywhere on that spectrum, but pretty much everybody probably does it. I don't know. I'm not in everybody's mind, so I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure everybody probably goes through that. And if you're an atheist, you'll be firmly against religion in general, any religion. You'd be against the biblical religion of, religions of Judaism, Christianity. But what I wanted to get into in particular was that, a wide scope of many different reasons. Like if someone was to ask me, like, and let me say before I forget, in science as well as, you know, prevailingly predominated by atheists. So a lot of the top scientists are atheists, right? So all the scientific arguments that we get for reality claim that God isn't real, right? So that's part of our skeptical world that we live in. So, anyways, so I said that part. So these are the various reasons why I believe. So if someone was to ask me, like an uber skeptic was to ask me, "Oh, why do you believe? That's so ignorant." In light of all the knowledge we have now, and how we know the Bible is wrong and this and that there was just made up, why do you still believe in it? That's so ignorant. That's like the atheist perspective, right? So if someone asked me a question like that, this video would be, roughly, would be my response. I'm gonna give quick, simple reasons why I personally, and I think anybody of sound mind, sensible mind, should go with the logically sensible choice um, in this situation. And as I will show from my own evidence that I'll supply here, you'll see that the sensible, logical choice is that God is real. The Bible, Jesus, all that is real. And I will be simplifying things and shortening what could be long talks into a short video here, right? So keep that in mind as well. But first of all, so let's start with God, right? So one important point I want to make is that the world we live in is impossible. And I could further elaborate that in a really interesting way about time, space, and matter and all of that. But sparing that longer conversation, what I will say is that the paradox of which came first, the bird or the egg, really is, a home run hit. It's a one does all type paradox, because if you sensibly examine what the paradox shows, it is, it's a good point. I've had, the reason I'm saying it like that is because I've had atheists directly tell me that, oh no, you don't understand evolution. Birds came from reptiles, and it's just like, I don't know what tangent or Twilight Zone, parallel universe they're from, but I'm speaking plain simple English. Which came first, the bird or the egg? Saying it as simple as possible, the paradox, and they're just like, oh no, but birds evolved from reptiles. You just don't understand. And it's just some people can't grasp it, and I've encountered that multiple times, and it always perplexes me. like different people. So it can't just be one person like making a joke, right? Or being ignorant. So I just want to throw that out there again now, because every time I mention this type of talk, I always get an atheist showing up saying that, oh, well, birds evolved from reptiles. That's why you don't have, that's the answer to which came first, the bird or the egg. No, the which came first, the bird or the egg, is a um, stellar point. It's a stellar piece of evidence because, and I like to say it in a different way to help illustrate its point further, right? And it's that in order to have a bird, so like the great question is which came first, the bird or the egg, right? So if you're going to try and solve the paradox, which you can, you'd pick one of the two, because it's got to be one of the two, right? Either the bird came first or the egg came first. The paradox is, unfortunately, like the brick wall you hit, is that if you pick either one, it's impossible. Okay, so if you pick the bird, so the bird came first. Okay, so it's like I said, it's either one or the other. So let's pick bird. You pick bird, so the bird came first. Well, in order to have a bird, it has to come from an egg. Like it hatches from an egg and grows up into an adult bird. So if you have a bird, it must have come from an egg. So the bird couldn't come first. So the egg had to come first. Okay, so let's look at it if the egg came first. Could the egg come first? Well, no, because you need a bird to lay an egg. You can't have an egg without a bird, right? So it's impossible. That's why it is a verified paradox. It is impossible to ascertain which came first, the bird or the egg. So in the atheist scientific approach to our worldview and reality and everything, and how they deny God, they cannot sincerely and truly answer that paradox because nobody can, especially from the atheistic scientific current worldview. However, there is an answer to it because, yes, that statement is a paradox, and it is true, it is a paradox. However, there is a solution to the problem that the paradox suggests, right? The solution is that the bird or the egg, whichever one, was created, and that's how it got here. Okay. But also, in case other people didn't clue in, I think it's common sense, like beginner level common sense, but it's not just about birds and eggs. It can be applied to anything because virtually every living type of creature, in some way or shape or form, is born from an egg. Whether the egg, like with lizards or snakes, it's like a little egg that's ejected out and then a living creature comes out, similar to like chickens or birds. Or like with humans, our eggs are tiny and they're up inside the mother's womb and we develop in there, and that's like what mammals do. So there's all different approaches. But I mean, even with plants, spores are kind of like eggs, or like the male equivalent. It's just everything. Plants, everything works by that, right? So everything, and my point is, it's not just about birds and eggs. It can be applied to anything. And what it comes down to logically is, how did anything that's living get here? How did it come? Like the atheist scientific approach, worldview, if you want to call it that, with I still believe in evolution as a religious person, as a Christian, but evolution can be real biblically. No reason why it can't be. But just certain things that have been taught to us, by other people, is incorrect. Certain opinions, okay? But evolution is real. Yes, there's no denying that, right? And it doesn't defy the Bible. The fact that people may have evolved from cavemen, that does not defy the Bible at all. I don't have time to explain why here, but that doesn't defy the Bible. Those are just minor things, but atheists have problems with. So there's a lot of people who lost their faith because when science discovered cavemen, they thought that defied the Bible. My point is, all those things don't defy the Bible. Evolution doesn't, and all of that there. But all these living, let me get back on track. All these living things had to come from somewhere, and they cannot come from nothing. Okay, so my point is that in mentioning that was that even if evolution is real, which it is, right? The problem is that with evolution, there's no way at all for the bird or the egg to come first, right? It's not possible, because evolution is what creates an organism, a creature, and whatever type it is. It might be a dolphin or a giraffe. You know what I mean? Evolution is spectacular, but everything evolution, the human theory of evolution says everything evolved from a primal point. That's what I mean, is where evolution can still be real, even biblically, but it's a certain things that we're taught that aren't correct, right? One is that every living thing evolved from, like one primal thing. So I believe there's evolution within, branches of certain species or whatever it might be. Things will evolve over time. Even humans can evolve over time, and probably have. That again, that none of that defies the Bible. Whether we descended from apes is another question. I suppose there could even be a fair argument made that even that doesn't maybe defy the Bible as much as people might think, anyways. Um, Not that I believe that I don't believe that we did descend from apes, but I think my over, you know, my the more important thing hovering in the room right now is that all these living things could not have come from their source, like egg or whatever equivalent. They had to be created. That's what the logic shows. That is the only solution. That is the only solution to the paradox, and that is how, with a solution to the paradox, you then have a higher understanding that, okay, well, there never really was a true paradox. Only if you word something with a limited view in, the phrase paradox that we use, the bird or the egg paradox. When you do that, that itself is a paradox, but the grander scheme of reality is not a paradox. That's my point, because there is a solution and there is actually no paradox. There's only a paradox when you create one, so to speak, by limiting the view, okay, and so forth, right? So that's my point. So everything had to be created. Now, I'll just touch on this, but I've even asked the AI. I've got a number of them saved as documents as well. The answers from the AI. So I asked the AI a bunch of times, maybe 3, 4, 5 times. Getting into about the Big Bang and how possible is it? How possible is it that it's not true? And the impossibility of this, that, and there. Some of the things I mentioned here. So I had some great questions. And basically, long story short, to keep things quick, the answer from the AI each time is that, essentially, I'm talking about 3 or 4 or 5 different, multiple page long answers to different questions just being summed up in like one thing here. I'm just simplifying it. But the AI essentially in each case was saying, to the extent, yes, the plausibility is, whatever, 90 something percent, that it is more likely that there was a supra, as I was terming it, supra meaning above, supra dimensional being that existed before what our science regards as the Big Bang event, and that this supernatural being is the source of all this creation, which would otherwise be like a paradox. So that's a simplifying it. None of the solutions literally said that word for word, obviously. But that was the general gist from the answers. So the AI was forced to admit, in light of the evidence as criteria that I provided it, the logics that show that God must be real, it weighed it out against the atheistic scientific theory, our worldview with the Big Bang, everything coming from that. I had questions where I listed off logical things, logical statements that anybody can observe that show that the Big Bang would be impossible, right? So listing them off, putting them as criteria into the question. So the AI was forced to admit that it is more likely and more plausible that everything didn't come from a Big Bang like science is saying, but that there was like I said, a supra-dimensional God of, some type of omnipotence, potency, who is just beyond what we perceive and know as dimensions. And because he is supra dimensional, he was able to create these, to him, more limited and lesser dimensions. He could just freely create and develop them and whatnot, like a creator, like an architect. And, we're just a little flotsam floating around in one of his creations, because, he on the grander scale is just so grand compared to the creations that he's creating. So all of that is possible. And the beauty of it is that the supra-dimensional nature of God, as I put it in those questions to the AI, is what the Bible teaches. It's not something outside those realms. So that's just another good point. So, like I was saying, the first two reasons summed up really quickly was, um, there had to be a creator, right? That was, I can't remember if I'm missing the first point now, but anyways, right? But summing up the last few minutes of yappering, there had to be a creator. Logic shows that, right? We could not have come, like, science does not have a full grip. They have good understanding about a lot. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to go against science, but I'm just saying that, certain opinions in science are incorrect. They need to further blossom and develop, right? But we definitely, everything had to be created. And it is logically impossible that, any energy or matter or particles of any form, anything came from a big bang, right? Time, space, matter, anything. It's impossible for it to come from a big bang. It is impossible. The Big Bang is just a theory. And once you understand these things, it makes you question reality more. And like I said, the logic can show you, and even the AI, looking at the logic as criteria, had to conclude that it's more plausible that there is a God, as he's called, who is just beyond our known dimensions, and because of that, he was able to exist exist outside of what we know as time and space, right? Before all things, he's the first and the last, the alpha and the omega, and all that type of omnipotent power and status could very well come from a being that is supra-dimensional. Either it's a higher dimensional, or it's just beyond the dimensions relevant to us, right? That's the point. It would explain how all the laws of science, like 2 pi r and pi r squared, and all the countless laws of mathematics, geometry, and science, where they came from. They're like invisible things that existed and humans perceived and realized and studied and revealed to the world, right? But they existed before the humans discovered them. And they have numbers and formulae and patterns to them. Where did all this come from? From some chaotic scattering and expansion after a mythical Big Bang? Well, I think not, right? That's preposterous. And there's a lot of art and symmetry and design and beauty to these formulas, especially like fancy stuff like calculus and all of that. All of these things, even though those systems are human created, they work by these invisible but real principles. I always call these type of things principles of reality. They are things that exist. Principles tend to be invisible things, but they definitely exist, right? Without question. There's no speculation, no conspiracy, right? They definitely exist and they cannot be ignored. So something created those laws of maths and geometry and everything. Even though we've put our human masks on them and called them this and that there and given them shapes and alphabets, those invisible principles existed, right? The ratios that determine things in geometry and the 2 pi r formulas and all this, like all of those invisible principles that, and I'm saying this for the brainier people out there, the brainy skeptics, right? I want them to appreciate this, because nobody ever thinks about those invisible principles, right? It would make far more sense, and even the AI had to conclude this. But it's just logical that they were designed and created, right? That would make much more sense. Like, these laws don't fluctuate in and out of existence. They don't decrease, increase, decrease, fluctuate, and all of that, right? They don't pop in and out of existence or fluctuate in and out of existence, is what I meant by that, by fluctuating. And they themselves don't fluctuate like up and down and this and that in terms of their magnitude or whatever. These laws are constant. So what made these laws, these principles, and what made them constant, what designed them? It had to be a creator. So there has to be a God, right? So anyways, look, I've studied virtually all the world religions. It was a very arduous task. I started when I was about 16, 17, but definitely by 18 years old. most of the world religions out there, a lot of them, most of them are from ancient times, and each one varying depths, right? I didn't go super deep on every single one. Some of them I went extremely deep, like with Hinduism. I studied that extremely hard for about 15 years. I went quite deep for a few years at first in ancient Egyptian, then Greco and Roman. I touched on Celtic, touched on a lot of Native American. You get the idea, right? So for all these different cultures around the world, and I'm sorry, and it's not a biased opinion. After studying them all, with the interest in, if one sounds more plausible, I'll go with it. That's why, I saw some insight in Hinduism, like wisdom, I thought at the time, and I went with it, and that's why I stuck with that for 15 years as well. But not defying what I biblically believe, but finding reason to also believe that as well, having truths. But at the end of the road, it was 15 years wasted because I had been ignoring the fact that it's still, and I'm not getting into this as a topic, but it's still paganism. It's still idolatry with idols and justifications for what is idolatry in the Bible. So even out of all the other world religions that I did study, none of them are sensible and plausible. The Bible, the biblical religion, Judaism, and Christianity, that is really the best one that's out there. And I'm not saying that from a biased perspective. I I I checked virtually all the other ones out there, and even ones that are long gone from ancient history, and they are definitely not plausible. And if people think there are questionable things or bad things in the Bible, which there are sometimes because of redaction in historical times, that pales in comparison to what these other cultures and whatnot believed and practiced. Teach their own, right? But generally speaking, but they are all riddled with, a shamanistic type, esoteric approach to things, rituals, usually very ritualistic and idolatrous, with idols and idol type worship and superstitions and mysticisms. This was prevalent in virtually all the world cultures. Um, Multiple deities and gods, everything that occurred had a deity behind it. This is what most cultures were like, right? And the only thing that stood out as a shining example against all of that ridiculousness in reality is the biblical monotheism. So, whilst, and I'm not getting into this here for this video, but I can explain things and I could talk about this, and I may even already have videos on it. But the Bible was redacted at times, right? There's evidence for that. It doesn't defy God being real or anything. Because, like I've said before, the Bible doesn't itself say that it's infallible. The Bible says in the Old Testament, Tanakh, and the New Testament, from God and from Jesus, that people are capable of adding to or taking away, and hence also twisting the scripture, but that you shouldn't do it. If you do it, you're going to get in trouble, obviously, with God, right? So that's a warning that it can be manipulated. And so, yeah, in the Bible elsewhere, nowhere does it say, elsewhere that it's infallible or perfect, or it cannot be changed, right? A lot of the books in the Bible were, there's certain things that God allegedly said that we have faith that were, transcribed, either accurately, like dead accurate, or, good enough for their effectiveness to serve. And we all have faith in that, right? A lot of people who are taught that the Bible's infallible, a lot of religious and, Jewish and Christian people are taught that, they ignore the evidence for the redactions and so forth. Like, again, I said I don't have time to get into this in deep, right? But there's little flaws, if you want to call it that, in the Bible. They don't defy the reality of God, Jesus, whatnot whatsoever, right? The Bible was never a magical document that couldn't be touched or changed. That's a fairy tale. That's not real, even according to the Bible. So the Bible can be manipulated. The Bible contains verses that give evidence that it's been manipulated. There's even one or two verses from God in the Bible that say it's been manipulated. Like in the Bible itself, it says this. So, like I said, I don't have time to further expand on that. But the little, the few specks that are in there, the problems, as some might view it, they aren't they aren't problems. I can explain them easily. It's not an issue. Sorry. So the shining example was biblical monotheism. Now, sorry, biblical monotheism is also the exact cause for why the world depaganized. So, science used to be suppressed even by, the Judeo-Christian religion. Christianity especially would suppress religion for hundreds of years. But also, arguably, everybody picks on Christianity for that, which would be the Catholic and the Protestant type churches mainly. But before that, all humankind's history was scientifically, like typically, it was scientifically suppressed by the religious rulers, because most world cultures were religious cultures. I don't think there were many, if any, atheist cultures, in most of Earth's history. The vast majority were all religious, and the spiritual folk, the spiritual high folk, like would be the priests or shamans or whatever in any given culture, and they had basically the most power. They were usually the lawmakers and so forth, and the highest regarded in the land, even if they weren't kings. They would be the priests. They would always be like the next best to the royal family in any type of culture. This is what you'd see around the world. um, and my point is that science, and I'm saying this from a universal perspective now with our modern, position, universal in that I'm considering atheist plus, you know, the contrary opinion. So, both opinions from our modern perspective, looking backwards. Um, I just wanted to say that so that people can appreciate it from those perspectives. That in ancient times, all the way up through history, up until the arrival of Christianity, you could argue fairly that science was suppressed because of religion, other religions. So everybody picks on Christianity, but all the world cultures, religions were suppressing true scientific advancement and understanding. A lot of them were investigating things, chemistry and math. Don't get me wrong, I know that, I'm not ignorant, but overall, I'm saying. Because even up until 1000 and something AD, depending where you look, and even in Europe, everybody likes to stereotype Europe as being so advanced and whatnot, ahead of other people of the time back in history. Well, looking up in Europe, even a couple hundred years ago, or 500 years ago, or whatnot, maybe 800 years ago, there were still many pagan tribes up throughout the various European lands. They hadn't yet converted to Christianity or whatnot. Most of them did convert to Christianity, right? So a lot of them were still pagan. My point is that paganism existed on the earth, prevalent on the earth, dominant on the earth, all the way up until let's just say 500 years ago. And the only thing that changed that was biblical Christianity. Judaism never went out and evangelized. So, it was Christianity mainly that did that. So it's thanks to Christianity. And so this is a tangible effect in the world that anybody can see and observe by looking at history, using common sense, like I just explained, which was using common sense. Anybody can observe these factual, truths about history and reality, and that the paganism is gone from the earth. Now, if we didn't have the Christians show up, whose imperative it was to depaganize the peoples, because first and foremost they had to teach about the one God, the biblical one God. Because of if we didn't have the Christians doing that, then Judaism never would have done it, because it's never been their imperative to do that. They never have, and they even today teach their own, proudly proclaim that they never will, because they're not told to do that. So it was the Christians historically who did that. And if the Christians didn't exist and come around, then the world would probably still be pagan, because like I said, the only thing that really changed paganism across the world was Christianity. We might all still be beating drums and going to the Druids once a week, depending on what country you live in. You know what I mean? If we didn't have Christianity, at best, even the Roman Empire, we think it was so advanced, and it was. Don't get me wrong, but they were still pagans, worshiping statues and believing that there was a deity, doing every single act of nature. It's just preposterous. So, you know what I mean, and doing crazy rituals and all this and that there, because that was their religious belief. So we had definitely And paganism thrived on the earth. I mean, ancient Egyptian empire lasted for, thousands of years. There's many different empires that lasted for hundreds of years or up to 1,000 years, whatever, across the board. That's my point. It's not like a religious empire would fizzle out because it's religious, from an atheist skeptic's perspective, right? If we look back at history, the evidence shows us that no, religions were quite successful, and they persisted for all these thousands of years very strongly, and all deluding the people with these pagan beliefs. And the only reason any of that changed was because of Christianity. So that is a tangible, great evidence for the real the genuine nature, the existence and the realness, the validity of Christianity, right? Those early Christians risked their life and limb to go out and testify about God and Jesus. Why? Because either they had been witnesses, or I'm talking about the earliest ones who were sent out, by command of Jesus and the disciples and the apostles, right? They would either witness things themselves, miraculous things, or whatever it might be. But we had those first-hand witnesses, and they risked their life and limb only because they believed wholeheartedly that Jesus and God were real. That's the only reason why they went out throughout the world to these uncontacted tribes. I mean, even like the Vikings, you go out to these Vikings, they would, destroy you if you try to talk about another deity. But the Christians did this. They risked their life and limb going to countless lands, even to, cannibalistic headhunter lands and so forth. And they converted a lot of peoples away from terrible things. And a lot of semi-civilized, you could say, cultures back then were still practicing terrible things as well, very barbaric things. So all these barbaric and pagan and heathen and just barbaric practices and beliefs that people had were removed by Christianity. That is a great piece of evidence to its genuine, realness, to its effectiveness, to its power, and the fact that all those early Christians risked their lives to go into these foreign lands. People didn't even speak their language, right? Allegedly, they were able to do miracles like heal people and speak foreign languages spontaneously, right? By an inspiration or direct connection to God or whatever. Whether those more fanciful claims are true or not doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, historically, they did what they did. They went to the lands and spread, the knowledge about God and Jesus, and that's why everybody came on board. That's why half the world's population today follows Jesus in one way or another, and 1/3 of the world population is Christian. So that's an astounding thing. So Jesus and God have to be real. I mean, if Jesus is real, God has to be real. And if Jesus and God are real, I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense. If you have Jesus becoming the most popular person, this is another great point to make that I've made before. But Jesus is the most popular person in all of history. He's the most influential person in all of history. This is undeniable. And quick summary, although I like to go into longer on this, I've got to get going. So, but he is without a doubt the most influential person. You know what I mean, with those numbers of followers, and over 2,000 years his followers have only increased, right? And so many people have miracles in their lives where they feel that prayers are answered, that God is, they feel that God is real and that he listens to them, that he cares, and that he helps them in their life. You have countless testimonies, millions, billions of such testimonies around the world. And I even have my own things that are just so miraculous. God definitely helped me. Sometimes I even directly asked for it and he helped me, things like this. Everybody's got cases like that, and that's evidence for God as well, because God isn't an absent God. Even though we don't get to see him here on this earth for certain reasons, he's not absent entirely. He is real. He does exist. And even the Bible even says that he's invisible. He's a spirit. He doesn't have a form or image. So we shouldn't expect to have some visible God looking like a deity person walking around on the earth with a crown on his head, because he's invisible. He's probably greater than the universe, maybe even literally bigger or greater than the universe. Maybe he really is everywhere, in all things, through all things. Maybe he's just everywhere because of his omnipotent, super dimensional nature. right? But whatever he's like, I'm not going to try and define him, because nobody truly knows. He must be real, and he must care, because there's so much personal testimonies that people have had near-death experiences, which are usually quite consistent with uh, generally Christian theology, even if it's with people who aren't religious or from different religions. A lot of near-death experiences tend to be the same main events taking place, which line up with what the Bible says, will probably happen or should happen. So you have all these different evidences, but you also got the prophecies in the Bible. Like I've said before, I've got videos on this. There's about 25 Bible prophecies given in the Bible, written by different authors, from different books in the Bible, different time periods, and all of these different, all, excuse me, all of these different prophecies were to be fulfilled, starting from, let's just say, about 500 BC till the end of days. Certain events that would take place. Sometimes, an order is given, right? But 25 different ones, and they've all come true, right? And it's revealed in order and revealed a timeline overall, because they've come true, and it's verified things in history and aligned it with what the Bible said would happen. Many examples of this, and like I said, it's a total of about 25 that I've counted. There could even be more, but 25 that have taken place. And it's pretty hard to say that so many different authors who lived genuinely at different times, even from a hardened skeptic view, different books of the Bible were written hundreds of years apart, even in the most skeptical view. So not all these authors knew each other, definitely, whoever the authors were. There's no way that they could plot and conspire together, and there's no way that all of them could coincidentally get, their guesses right as to what would happen in the future. But just one of the prophecies alone, out of the list of the 25, Ezekiel's prophecy, and being very quick, because I have to go right now, so like summing this up quicker than it should be. But I have a video on this that's still up, I believe. But I asked the AI and put in certain criteria, certain things from Ezekiel's prophecy that have taken place and been fulfilled in like history, in a recent history. Ezekiel, the book was definitely written a few hundred years BC, or most recent, like 100 or 200 BC, because it's found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I'm not mistaken. But in either case, it's definitely, like 2,000 years, like 1,500, 2,000 years or more, at least, before the events that it spoke about would take place in history, right? So it's irregardless. It's still proven. But the odds, according to AI, it calculated them, excuse me, were approximately 1 in 50 billion. For Ezekiel, if a fraudulent document written by whoever at whatever time, if the prophecies of Ezekiel were not genuine prophecies from a divine godly source and they were just made up by somebody, what are the odds, I was asking it, that it would coincidentally come true? And I stated what the prophecy claimed would come true, and I showed the examples in history when it was fulfilled. The AI concluded that it would be 1 in 50 billion odds, right? So to put that number in perspective, science, and I'll end on this note because I've got to get going. There's probably more other good reasons I could have mentioned as part of this video, but I'm going to be late, right? But 1 in 50 billion is so large when you think about it, because science says that our solar system, universe, whatever, let's just say is 13 billion years old. Let's just round it up to 15 billion years old. 50 billion is over 3 times that, okay? And if the universe is 10 billion, then it's 5 times, right? But my point is that 1 in 50 billion can be best illustrated as this: that if the universe is 15 billion years old, we would have to wait 15 billion years, over 3 times. So 3 full cycles of 15 billion years. And in each one given year of those 50 billion years, there would be a hypothetical, logically, a hypothetical chance that something would occur, right? That God would arrive or whatever. And you have 1 in 50 billion chance of this occurring. It's going to happen at some point. You have 3 cycles, right? Now, when you apply that illustration 1 in 50 billion odds of Ezekiel's prophecy coming true and all those points if it was just a fraudulent document, meaning, just coincidentally, the guy got it right by making stuff up and he just guessed it right. 1 in 50 billion odds. So if it was fake and it just coincidentally came true, the odds that it would require would be equivalent to the chance of it occurring once in three full, if it was to occur once in any given year, it would occur once only in over 3 cycles of the known universe, from conception to 15 billion years maturation. Over 3 cycles that long, and at least just one chance in all of that time that this thing would occur, right? Those are ridiculous odds. It shows you the logic and that's just one prophecy I tested with the AI, right? That one there doesn't even have numbers and time periods in it. The prophecy of Daniel will probably be 1 in 50 trillion for all I know, right? But the fact is that the logic shows that the Bible must be real. The Dead Sea Scrolls is another thing. I just don't have time to get into it. That's got to be real. All those things have to be real. God is real. Jesus was real. The Bible has to be real. And there you go, folks. They found about, I think, like 95% of the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's about 95% identical to what it is today. You know what I mean? It's just great evidence. I just don't have further time to talk about it. But anyways, take care, folks, and see you all later.